Last Saturday night, unless you were an East Coast viewer, then it was 2 a.m., USC needed a last-second field goal to force overtime before beating Texas. Well, this week, Penn State had their moment of survival by beating Iowa on the final play of the game. Will those two wins end up saving both teams' chances to win a national championship? Only time will tell. Meanwhile, in the NFL, Deshaun Watson proved why I always felt, just like his former coach Dabo Swinney did, when he said any team that passes on Watson at the draft will be passing on Michael Jordan. The Texans did lose, but they actually won. I'll explain exactly why that win, or actually why that loss, was actually a win. All this coming up as the OFN on PSN starts now. All right, it's Monday, the 25th of September, 2017. I'm your host, Greg DePalma, and also coming up is our fantasy football coverage. Dan Weinreich is going to be with us. Jamal Murphy will not be with us, and I know he is working 20 jobs. One of those is our Nets show on the Prime Sports Radio Network, Brooklyn Nets. Okay, Nets, not Jets. We did do our Jets show just a few minutes ago on that network as well. But this is the Ourlads Football Network, and it's the first show of the week. So we have a lot to talk about. We have college football, as I mentioned, NFL, and fantasy coming up in about 15 minutes from now. So, a lot going on. And a little bit later on, we'll talk about some of those key injuries from this past week that will impact not only the NFL, but, of course, fantasy football players. So we'll get into that. Early look ahead at Thursday night, Chicago, Green Bay. Also, I will go over and break down all these key games in the NFL, which we'll do we'll do it again on Thursday with our show with Tony Mejia. That's when we preview the week in the NFL. So that'll be on Thursdays. It's on every Thursday. And by the way, we debuted our college football coverage on Saturday, and we're going to move that show. That basically what we did was we were going to get that show on a little bit earlier in the season, but we had so much going on that it was a little bit later than we would have liked, but we did get it on. Even got it on a little bit later on Saturday than we would have wanted, but we got it on nonetheless, and we're going to now air that show every Friday. So we'll have a Thursday NFL preview show with Tony Mejia on Thursdays, and then we'll have a Friday college football preview show. Right now I don't have a regular co-host, but that's okay. We're still going to let you know what's going on every week at that point, key injuries, trends, odds, picks, and all that kind of stuff. Again, that'll be Fridays. I believe we have it set now for 4 o'clock on Fridays. Let me just double check. Yes, 4 o'clock on Fridays, because don't forget we have our fantasy football coverage at 2 o'clock every Friday. All right, so let's get right to it. And in college football, as I mentioned, the big win for Penn State. Look, I've said this enough about Penn State that you know how I feel and how highly I look at guys like Barkley and even McSorley. And now you can see why. Look, McSorley's not going to be a pro quarterback, but McSorley is just a fantastic college quarterback. And I was glad that he was able to do that, because that just reaffirmed kind of what I said going into the game last week. I didn't know which way to go, so I stayed away from the game. I talked about this with Dan Shanka, talked about this also on the college football show on Saturday, that the reason I was staying away from the game was because of the fact that, look, I know how tough Iowa can be at Iowa. Okay, they beat Michigan last year in the same kind of situation at night. We've talked highly about what we've seen so far from the Hawkeyes this season. And here comes Penn State, a team that does not blow out these teams very often. That's just not the way they are. See, USC does that. USC's got the high-powered offense, the Sam Darnold, possibly first pick in the draft offense. They could blow out teams. Penn State doesn't do that. That's not to mean that they don't blow teams out sometimes, but that's just not what they do. They're not a high-powered offensive pass team. They rely on Barkley, first and foremost, and then, of course, McSorley to make big plays when they need it. Sort of like what we saw at the end of the season last season, which included the huge comeback win against Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship game, as well as a tremendous performance against USC in the Rose Bowl. And then he does it again, reaffirming that, yes, he may not be the sexy quarterback. He may not be somebody that you point to about the NFL draft, but he sure is somebody that you look at in college football as a guy that, hey, you can count on when the chips are on the line, and they were on the line in that game. In a game that they should have had won. it was one of those games that if they had lost, they would have been kicking themselves. They had opportunity after opportunity to just put this Iowa team away. There's no way Iowa should have been in this football game, let alone have Iowa take the lead with a minute and a half left. But Penn State did the job, marched down the field, under 2 minutes to go, completed a 4th and 2. Matter of fact, the two biggest plays were short passes. And look, that right there just shows you some guts. I'll say this for the coordinator, because I wasn't very happy going into that touchdown pass at that point that they hadn't let Barkley touch the ball on those last 3 or 4 plays. Barkley was he was in to block, but Barkley's the best player in the team. Matter of fact, right now, Barkley's the best player in college football. And matter of fact, when Dan Shanka, when we talked about Barkley a couple of weeks ago, Dan said he think he could be the first pick in the draft. And, to have a running back as the first pick in the draft, I was surprised to hear that from Dan. And I'll talk more with Dan about that on Wednesday. So there's a difference, of course, in how I think about a player. As much as I have loved Barkley, as you know, listening to me on this network for the last couple of years, there's a big difference to love a player and think, oh, yeah, it'd be a top 10 pick. He could be a great pro. It's another thing to be the number 1 pick in the draft as a running back. That's saying something that I think if you had heard the show a couple of weeks ago, maybe that is also reaffirming. Barkley is awesome. I mean, he is just incredibly talented. He's got ability that very few running backs have. And he should be right now. I haven't even looked at the latest Heisman voting. I will, because I'm going to post. I'm going to post a little bit of something on best player of the year. Not necessarily a Heisman thing, but because I don't want to go down that road before that we've talked many times about. My feelings on the Heisman. And as big as Baker Mayfield's win at Ohio State was, Barkley's was better, and Barkley is just better. Period. Now, will Baker Mayfield win out because he had the one big road win and then he might just stat the hell out of the season? Sure. I mean, that happens. I mean, Jackson won the award last year, didn't beat anybody. He just put up all the stats. Mayfield won't put the stats up Jackson in, but he did have the big signature win at Ohio State, and he's a quarterback. So we'll see. I haven't looked at the Heisman odds since I don't know, a week or two ago, but I'll look them up. But Barkley, if he's not 1, he's got to be 2. And he should be 1. It should be Mayfield, Barkley, and then the rest. But that was huge win for Penn State. And but look, college football. The other thing that I realized when I was watching some of these games is that it is so unfortunate that unless you're Alabama or Ohio State, you can't lose a game and expect to get into the playoffs. It's very, very difficult. Not that you can't get there. Clemson did. It's very, very difficult. And so you realize that if Penn State lost this game, maybe they wouldn't get a chance. It's possible. Same thing with USC. It would have been possible. Now, based on the fact that they went to the Rose Bowl, maybe they would have got the benefit of the doubt, run the table, win their championship games. Okay, maybe there would have been a real good shot. But you just don't want to leave it up. You just don't want to leave it up to politics, especially USC and Penn State. They saw what happened last year. They don't want to leave that up to the committees that weren't kind to them last year. Why would they think they'd be kind to them this year? Penn State, as far as the rest of their schedule, they get Indiana this week. And then at Northwestern, then they take a break. But they have a very, very tough 3-game stretch. Now, and that's it as far as the toughness of their schedule. Now, it doesn't mean that at Maryland, last game of the season, won't be difficult as long as they can keep their quarterbacks healthy. But if you take a look at that 3-game stretch from October 21st to November 4th, you got Michigan at home, Ohio State, and then Michigan State back-to-back on the road. Now, the good thing is that the most difficult in a stretch like that is always the 3rd game. That's the easiest game at Michigan State. So that's a good thing. That doesn't mean that game will be easy, because that will definitely be hard. Because you go back-to-back with Michigan, Ohio State. Look, if you lose one of those 2 games, believe it or not, that game becomes easier. But if you win both of those games somehow, then all of a sudden that Michigan State game is Trap City. Because you then say to yourself, is it better in the voters' eyes, okay, or the committee's eyes, to lose to Michigan, Ohio State as opposed to Michigan State? Okay, because if you lose the Michigan Ohio State game, they're going to go, well, okay, you can't expect them to beat every team and then back to back. They won the Big Ten championship. They only lost one game. Okay, they're in. Oh, but they lost to Michigan State and they got 4 losses, and so it is what it is. But I do think that if Penn State, see, you lose at Iowa, and that's not a bad loss. But if you lose in week 4, one hand, you got the whole season to make it up. But the whole reason this is not a good thing is look what happened to them last year. Okay, they lost twice last year, and that is what prevented them, and only once in the conference, and that is what prevented them from going to the playoffs. So if they had lost to Iowa, they had pretty much no chance to lose another game to get to the playoffs. Pretty much no chance. So that's why that would have been very difficult, because then they would have to beat Michigan and then have to go to Ohio State and win and then have to go to Michigan State and win. And that's just asking, and then have to win the Big Ten championship game if they get in there. Well, they would at that point. So you see what I'm saying? So it would have been very, very hard, but they were able to get it done. And that's what's key. Speaking of the Big Ten, Michigan comes up with a big win over Purdue. And is it a surprise that Michigan's offense looks a little bit better as soon as Wilton Speight goes out? How many times do I talk about this on NFL shows and college football shows over the years? And I've said this for weeks with Jim Harbaugh and his stubbornness to play somebody other than Speight. I'd still prefer they go with Peters and even take the red shirt off of McCaffrey. Look, you probably haven't heard the name Dylan McCaffrey anywhere else other than Michigan, unless you're just really dialed into college and high school athletics. But Dylan McCaffrey, to me, from what I understand, they love Dylan McCaffrey more than Peters. And they're both 5-star. I think Peters was a 5-star. They're both big-time blue-chip high school quarterbacks. But I think if Peters was further along the way they would have preferred, like let's say McCaffrey. If this was McCaffrey's second year, I don't think there'd be any doubt McCaffrey would be starting for Michigan right now. There's something that they're not seeing in practice from Peters, okay, which frustrates me to no end, as you know, because I hate the whole practice thing. But for whatever reason, that's the way it is. So Peters better get a shot soon, or else he's going to find himself in a tough situation because they can't redshirt McCaffrey again next year. And then there's going to be true competition. Now, I don't know how long O'Korn's going to last. It all depends on how long Speight's out. Apparently, Speight's out for a while. Could be a few weeks, could be a few months. I don't know. But this is better for Michigan. Because, look, I took Purdue in the points. And didn't take them to win the game, but I took the points. But I wouldn't have taken Purdue if I knew Speight wasn't going to be the quarterback. That's the whole reason I took Purdue. I was expecting Speight to have a bad game, and that would have kept Purdue in the game, and maybe they could have upset them. The game was, 0-0 or something, right? I think it was. As a matter of fact, they were trailing 10-7 at halftime. So they needed 21 points in the second half with O'Korn under center in order to win that game. All right, so we'll see. Michigan, I still don't think they're going to win a championship with O'Korn. The only way I think they do that is O'Korn is going to have to get better and better each week. Maybe he can. He started a whole season at Houston a few years ago. He's got more experience than, say, guys like Peters and such. So he's got the ability. Maybe he just needs the reps. And if that happens, I said this before with Speight, maybe Michigan can pull an Alabama from a few years ago when they won the championship. And Coker, I mean, everybody was like, there's no way. I was like it. No way Alabama can win a championship with Jay Coker. And then Coker put together an Eli Manning-ish type of few games. I mean, Jay Coker did nothing his entire college career until like the last few games of his college career, which happened to be his 2 best games in the playoffs. And that's how Alabama won a championship. Now, of course, they won it because they also had great defense, and they had a tremendous running back who won the Heisman, and Derrick Henry. That's something Michigan does not have. They don't have that running game that Alabama had. But as we can see, they have a very good defense. It's a top-rated defense. So they've got those similarities. But the thing is do they have the type of quarterback that when it's said and done and the big games are on the line at the end of the season, that O'Korn will be able to get better? And by the way, what happens if O'Korn plays for a few games and he's okay? He's good. He's not great, but he's good, and then Speight's healthy. What does Harbaugh do? I mean, I know there's a lot of Michigan fans that know what they would do. The question is, what does Harbaugh do? Well, they get an extra week to prepare, and that's good for O'Korn and the offense until they take on Michigan State on October 7th. And they don't really have that big, tough game until that 21st game at Penn State. And really, if you take a look at Michigan's schedule, they're a little bit more open as far as they don't have those 3 in a row that Penn State has. But after the Penn State road game on the 21st, then they should be able to cruise for the next several weeks until the final 2 games of the season. And those 2 games, I don't see Michigan winning both because I'm big on Wisconsin now. We'll talk about that later. I'm adding them to my future portfolio. I'm buying in from what I've seen. I think they have a legitimate chance based on their schedule to get to the Big Ten championship game again. And if they can win it this time, then they might be able to be one of the representatives in the postseason, or at least a playoff situation. But anyway, Michigan having to win in Wisconsin and then beat an Ohio State team that they haven't been able to beat in forever. I think that's asking a lot for Michigan to be able to accomplish. So it's still an uphill battle, I think, for Michigan, which is why if you're asking me, would I take Michigan right now? And I think last week they were 12-1. Wisconsin was 33-1. I'd rather take Wisconsin because Wisconsin's got a much easier schedule. They're definitely going to wind up representing that division. Not that, of course, Iowa doesn't have something to say. And look, Iowa's been a lot better than people have thought they were going to be. But the game is going to be at Camp Randall. So Iowa has to go to Wisconsin to win that football game. That's not going to be easy because they're a completely different team, home than away Iowa. But for Wisconsin, their schedule, they have 2 tough games, really. Seriously, 2 tough games the entire season coming up, and that is Iowa at home, Michigan at home. That's it. And then they go to the Big Ten championship game, where I believe they're going to take on Penn State for the Big Ten championship, just like last year, and then that should decide which Big Ten team gets to the playoffs. More on college football a little bit. Let's talk a little NFL and fantasy specifically. Again, no Jamal Murphy this week, so Dan Weinreich is joining me. And Dan, one more game to go before the week is over. Week 3 of the NFL is in the books. So what do you think? What's the big headline for week 3 with one more game to go?
Well, it was a great week for the NFL. I mean, some really there were some blowouts, but there were some really highly competitive games that went down to the wire. For fantasy, it was a very unorthodox week, and some of us suffered for it, myself included.
Yeah, there were some crazy things that went on. I know. I mean, I got beat the same way you did. I mean, you had Watkins sitting the bench with his 2 touchdown performance in the LA Ram win. I wind up having Hogan sit for 2 touchdowns, which, by the way, I'm not doing again. For Kelvin Benjamin, because with Tom Brady at quarterback, that's it. I'm done. As long as Hogan plays over Benjamin every week. And the whole Kelvin Benjamin injury thing, this is what we talked about on the fantasy show, and this is what's been going on with Kelvin Benjamin his entire career. Every single game, something happens. He gets hit, whether it's because he's the one that's trying to be physical or he just can't take hits to his body, whatever the case may be. He can't last. And this is an ongoing theme with Benjamin. And this is something as a fantasy owner you just can't deal with.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely disappointing. I mean, pretty much everything out of Carolina is disappointing. Obviously, Greg Olsen is out. Yeah. Cam is not playing like he's even worth being owned. We had a little glimmer from Jonathan Stewart, and he's pretty much back to being irrelevant. And even McCaffrey is not living up to the expectations fantasy-wise. So definitely a very serious situation down in Carolina. I think, it's safe to say that Cam is not fully recovered from his off-season surgery. And maybe the Panthers should have taken a page out of the Colts book and not rushed him into starting because he's pretty ineffective right now.
Yeah, and they were very much to blame, just like the Colts were, where at least the Colts figured out. Might have been maybe almost too late to figure it out, but at least they made the move for Brissett, and that seemed to pay off yesterday. But the Panthers haven't. The Panthers, they're like one of these teams, and there's several of them out there that just feel like, oh, that's okay. We got Derek Anderson. Okay, I mean, they've been saying that for 5 years now, and the guy's like 80 years old. It's like the guy wasn't very good 5 years ago. What makes you think if you play Derek Anderson at whatever he is, 34 years old, that he'd be able to do anything against anyone? I wouldn't trust Derek Anderson against the Browns.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I would say he's probably a middle of the road backup, but since most backups are not really, there's only a handful that are
effective,
you have any kind of confidence in starting. That's what you get.
Yeah, and that's why the offense is definitely in a lot of trouble right now. By the way, is there anybody on Carolina that you can turn to? I know some people picked up Funchess this week. He wound up, I think, the number 2 receiver behind McCaffrey. Curtis Samuel had a big play in the game. But really, who would you go to besides the obvious McCaffrey? Is there a guy? Is it Samuel? Is it Funchess? I mean, who would you trust?
I mean, I think Funchess is probably the logical next guy to take up those targets from Cam. But I wouldn't really feel comfortable starting him if you're in a really deep league and you're really desperate. I would say you could probably count on Devin Funchess for 3 or 4 catches a game and maybe 40 or 50 yards, but he's not going to give you the kind of numbers that you Kelvin Benjamin owners were hoping to get when you drafted Benjamin, a la 900 to 1,100 yards and 8 to 10 touchdowns. Like Funchess isn't going to do that.
All right. Speaking of the Colts, nobody knows if Luck's going to play this week, but now there's more of a chance that he will. And all of a sudden, the Colts almost beat Arizona. They beat Cleveland. So they got to be feeling, hey, you know what? Maybe we get Luck back and anything's possible. But it all depends. Nobody knows if Luck's going to come back or not. But at least there's something, or at least there's some hope for fans of a couple of players on the Colts, including T.Y. Hilton, who had an unexpected big game.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, regarding Luck, if I'm not mistaken, I think the latest is that he's aiming to be back week 6. So that there may have been more recent updates, but that was the last I heard.
Today they said, okay, maybe they can. It's like the same thing you're hearing. It's like, well, maybe he might be able to get in there on Sunday. So you know what they're doing. Now, whether or not they're just playing smoke to the opposition, who knows?
I'm not buying it, Craig. The way I see it, they've been cautious this far. If he doesn't practice, he's not playing. He's
no, that's
play
true.
The week
that's true.
After he practices.
No, that's true. Yeah, he's got to practice.
But that said, like you meant, I mean, look, they were playing the Browns at home, so if there was ever a good matchup, that was it. But Jacoby Brissett was decent. He managed to find T.Y. Hilton, who had a huge game. On the other side of the spectrum, Jack Doyle, who we all anointed the next big tight end after
free agent pickup. Yeah,
he did nothing.
Yeah, and a fumble. Yep.
Yeah, and also once again, Dante Moncrief was pretty much irrelevant. So I think the point is, until Luck's back on the field, you really don't know who you can trust. Yes, T.Y. Hilton is the big playmaker. He led the NFL in receiving yards last year, but without Luck behind center, it's a bit of a crapshoot. So you start him if you have to. But other than that, we should wait for Luck to get back.
All right. A couple more big guys that we're gonna have to keep an eye on. First of all, well, we know for sure that Darren Sproles is out, and it just shows you how durable Sproles is for such a little guy. For him to finally get some sort of an injury that looks like it could sideline him, will for a while, and who knows for the season. But I found this interesting, and I know Darren Sproles is a nice little player, and I get that. But I talked about this on the NFL show on Thursday with Tony Mejia, that I thought that the one thing that the Eagles had to do was start to give Carson Wentz a little bit more rushing, not just commitment, because they were committed. They had some attempts over the first couple of weeks, but they weren't really gaining much. Most of Sproles' yards were coming from catches and some runs, but all of a sudden, Sproles gets hurt, goes down, and the combination of Smallwood and Blunt go for 138 yards on the ground. The team rushes for almost 200 yards.
Yeah, I mean, I don't understand exactly why they weren't trying to run the ball more in the first 2 weeks, to be honest with you, Greg.
With
But
other guys other than Sproles. I mean, Blunt did nothing against Kansas City. He got I don't even think he had a carry.
he didn't, but he did. But he had a nice little game in week 1, and so that's what was so surprising.
Yeah.
But if anything, that's the theme of this NFL season. It's almost as if coaches are trying to fight fantasy owners because they keep seeming to change the game plan week to week as far as who's getting the rock. But moving forward, if you were dumb enough to listen to me and drop LeGarrette Blount, that sucks. You should rush and try to pick up Smallwood. If by chance Blount is still available, grab him because he's obviously going to be fantasy relevant for the rest of the season with Sproles out. I believe the early prognosis is that he both tore his ACL and broke his arm. Talking about Darren Sproles now.
Yeah, he's done.
So it's pretty safe that you won't see him again this year. So definitely Blount. And Smallwood is only owned in something like 5% of leagues. He's going to see carries. So, and he might be the one to pick up Sproles' passing work out of the backfield. I think he's definitely worth looking at.
All right. And I know we talked about Melvin Gordon. That was a big topic on the show on Friday about the difference between him being a very viable fantasy option at this point in the season going into week 3, as opposed to just looking at his overall statistics as a 60-yard rusher in his first 2 games as just a regular fan of the team. But now, look, he had he did some things in this game, but then he gets hurt. He's limited. So is this something that you're worried about, the lingering knee issue?
No, I mean, until he's not playing in the game, and until he's not suiting up, you can't really worry too much about it. I mean, if you're a Gordon owner, you've got him most likely in the first round, possibly.
Oh yeah,
second round,
first round, sure.
Yeah, so you're never, he's doing great so far.
Would you trade him?
Skittish,
would you trade him?
Try to trade him. I mean,
you would.
Okay. I mentioned to you, Greg, as a fantasy producer, I don't have the exact season stats in front of me, but I'm sure he's in the top 10 for running back. So, you got a guy who maybe had David Johnson, and you've got a couple other running backs that you feel better about. By all means, if you trade him, you should get a number 1 wide receiver back at least. So
okay, that's if you trade him.
If
you trade him. And what about Baldwin? From what I can see is that, or what we've originally heard, is that it shouldn't be a major thing, but that doesn't mean that he, it sounds like something he'll probably be questionable all week as far as the groin injury. And if that does happen, then again, that's only a 1-week thing. And Russell Wilson likes to kind of spread it around to some of his receivers anyway. I mean, I have Paul Richardson. He doesn't catch a lot of passes or come out with big yards, even though he's scoring touchdowns. So that's frustrating for me to have Richardson there because I know how talented he is. I know he's got the finger issue. But it's like I expected more out of Richardson this year with Curse off the team. But it seems like, Russell Wilson, for whatever reason, he's using a whole bunch of different guys. But that's Russell Wilson, and Baldwin's his number 1 man.
Yeah, I mean, Baldwin, I'm always a little nervous owning Baldwin. I actually was watching a little of that game, and the announcers commented on how Baldwin reminds them of Steve Smith Sr. He has that same sort of scrappy physical approach. And he's not a huge guy, and he does get a lot of contact. So I do worry about him long term, but I think he'll probably be back next week. And yeah, I mean, I had Paul Richardson for a minute. I had Tyler Lockett. Basically the bottom line is there's nobody other than
Baldwin.
First option
or
is
Graham.
Baldwin, and the second option is Graham.
Yeah.
Exactly. So whether it's Richardson or Lockett, will they have a handful of 15 to 25 point games? I think they both will. But counting on them week to week is going to be a tricky proposition.
All right, before I let you go, the Thursday night game, because we'll wrap up the Thursday night game on the Fantasy Show on Friday afternoon. Chicago coming off the win against Pittsburgh. And Chicago, I mean, that was an ugly game, but that's how Chicago has to win their games. You know what I noticed in that game was that Chicago, out of Glennon's 15 completions, he had only one to a wide receiver. He had 12 of the 15 completed passes to the three running backs, including Cunningham. Howard had the big day. You know, he was playing like I don't know, like I mean, a man possessed. That guy would not come off the field. That was inspiring. So they're gonna, but they're that's who they are. I mean, Cohen continues to be a revelation as a rookie. So props to Jamal Murphy for pointing him out in the preseason, going into guys to keep an eye on as far as top rookies. But now you've got Green Bay, and not to say that Green Bay is going to shut down Chicago. I mean, Green Bay's still dealing with a whole bunch of injuries as well, especially on offense. I mean, Aaron Rodgers can't get comfortable back there unless he gets his linemen healthy. And the Bears are not a bad defensive team. I mean, they are what they are, but they're not bad. I mean, that's probably the strength of their team.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the Bears running back situation is quite outstanding at this point if you're a fan of the team. I mean, Tariq Cohen is a freak of nature. I don't know if you saw that play that got called back.
Yeah.
Because they said he was out of bounds at the 30-yard line. I mean, he literally beat the whole team.
Yeah.
He crisscrossed back and forth across the sideline. He's incredible. I mean, Jordan Howard is going to get his carries, but Tariq Cohen's reminding me of Reggie Bush coming out of USC. Just as far as like a really, really dynamic catching running back. But it doesn't seem like it's always this way in Green Bay. They're always dealing with issues, and Aaron Rodgers is having to tell the media to relax, and that he's going to run the table. There's always it seems like an old script for them. But I do like them in this matchup. I felt like, they 2-0 teams play hungry, and Chicago showed that. Pittsburgh has been vulnerable on the road. They showed that. But I think, when you just compare the teams, I feel like Green Bay just has too much firepower. I think they also have a better defense than Chicago. So I like Green Bay in this matchup.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think everybody will probably. It was to expect the Bears to win back-to-back games is asking for a whole lot, especially at Green Bay. But it's just the basics, right? It's like, okay, if you got Chicago players, you're going to take Cohen and Howard, and that's it. And as far as the Packers are concerned, really nothing changes. Even though Allison had a big game, that was basically because Cobb didn't play. Other than that, I will say this. If anybody has Martellus Bennett, just drop him because he's been terrible. And, he was always an inconsistent guy. He goes to New England, and big surprise, he all of a sudden looks like the guy that everybody thought he would have been because he's with the Patriots and Tom Brady, and it just always seems like the Patriots get the best out of these players every time they land in New England. And then as soon as he leaves to New England, the guy is just awful. I mean, he drops passes, he commits penalties, and I know a lot of people thought Bennett would be a sleeper tight end this year.
Well, if you look at the history of the Green Bay Packers and this offense over the last 2 years, no matter what tight end they have in there, they're not getting work. That's just not where Rodgers likes to deliver the ball, especially in the red zone. So I wasn't really shocked that Marty Bennett. There's been a little bit of disappointment, and I didn't touch him in drafts. I agree with you, although I will say this. If you ask me, my bet is that Randall Cobb is not playing. It's a short week. It's a Thursday game. He wasn't even close to playing last week. So I don't see him taking the field. Allison was over 100 yards.
Would you pick him up, Allison?
Yeah, if you're in a deep league, if you're in a league with 3 wide receivers and a flex, if you're looking for somewhere in the 10-point range, there's a guy on the waiver wire you should grab right now. I don't know what he will do long term. Mm-hmm. Then again, it might be a worthwhile investment in the long term because Randall Cobb, I think he only played something like 5 or 6 games last year altogether. He seems to have an issue, speaking of guys with issues with injuries. And, just because he makes it back to the field in 2 weeks, it doesn't mean he'll stay on the field. And, once Aaron Rodgers knows that he can trust the guy, he's going to go back to him. So Allison he's definitely good for week 4 for sure. And he might be good long term.
All right, Dan, appreciate you stepping in for Jamal. We'll have a lot more to talk about on Friday at 2 o'clock as we get everybody ready for the weekend and all the big Sunday games and so forth in the NFL week 4. So, actually, if you think about it already, just, as far as most of these teams, in a week, we'll already be a quarter way through the season. It goes fast.
Well, yeah, you're making me sad. Don't
say
that. I'm trying to revel in it.
That's all right. It'll feel like a couple of days from now I'll be saying, and we're halfway through the season. So that's the only thing that's a bummer about football. It's like these baseball seasons and basketball and hockey. It seems like they last 10 years. But like the NFL season, the college football season, it's like you look up and it's like it's almost over already. We waited all this time and it's almost over. So. All right, Dan, I appreciate it. Have a great week. Enjoy the game tonight and Thursday night. And by the way, tonight, anything tonight that you're interested in keeping an eye on besides Zeke, the obvious Zeke?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure other people, there's obviously a lot of people, there's a little bit of confusion in Arizona with both the running back and the wide receiver pecking order. I think a lot of people will be curious to see, can J.J. Nelson keep it up? Who's going to be getting the touches out of the backfield? As you know, Greg, I'm not really worrying about Zeke or Dak. I think they'll both be fine. I'm curious to see if Jason Witten can keep up the kind of production he had over the first 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But mostly I'm just going to be licking my wounds because all of my games have been decided already. So. Okay.
Well, hey, I'm 1-2 in our league too, but I just went up against, my 2 losses, I went up against, 170, 160 points. So there's nothing you can do about that. It's a long season.
First, we're still very early in the fantasy season.
Yeah.
I think until you get to week 6 or 7.
Then you can panic.
You can't worry too much about your standing.
Yeah. Thanks, Dan. Talk to you on Friday.
All right. Enjoy the game tonight, Greg. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. All right. That's Dan Weinreich. And again, he'll be with us and is with us every Friday with Jamal Murphy on Ourlads Fantasy Football. So we changed that Friday morning to Friday afternoons, which I'm okay with. Okay. I tell you what, let's continue with the NFL, and then we'll go to college football. Just a few more things in the NFL. And don't forget, we'll go into every game in the NFL, as we do every Thursday with Tony Mejia on OFN NFL Preview. So, and by the way, very, very happy, because remember I said this last week did I say it on this show? No, not on this show. What did I say it on? I forget what show I said it on. That we would get things going again with our NFL picks. It's just a matter of time. It's not that we had a great week. I think we had like a 500 week. But the good thing is or a game over 500. But anytime that you can have a 500 week or a game or two over 500, and then you get both of your upset specials, it's a good week. I like that week. So we hit both Chicago to beat Pittsburgh and New Orleans, which was our best money line play to beat Carolina. So we hit both of those. So we're getting there. It's not a surprise that we're off to a slow start in the NFL, and you can see why. How can you not be off to a slow start in the NFL with all these crazy scores that took place this week? Okay, and then some of those crazy scores this week, as we touched up on a few of them, but anyway, Jacksonville over Baltimore. Did Baltimore really make the trip? Seriously? I know Marshall Yanda is a good player, but I don't think he counts for a 37-point difference. Flacco had a 0.5 rating. And come on, Bortles had 4 touchdowns against the team that was the best. As a matter of fact, this is maybe something we'll talk about on Friday, because I know we were going over it, and I think Baltimore. I think actually in our fantasy league, Dan's got Baltimore, and Baltimore had the best fantasy defense in the league, and they give up 44 points to Jacksonville, and Blake Bortles 4 touchdown passes. So you tell me, all right, is that because Jacksonville's 37 points better than Baltimore, or even better than Baltimore? This is why it's impossible to know what players or teams, how they're going to react. You don't know. That's why if anybody's ever cautioned you to don't ever bet the mortgage, don't ever bet this, everything on this or everything on that, this is the reason, because you just don't know. Now, I will say that if you get to the postseason or you get to must-win games, that's different in my mind. So if you're ever going to put yourself in a situation where you're going to invest in something big, that's why my preference is futures. And part of the reason my preference is futures is also because I'm not a professional handicapper like Tony Mejia. So I'm not in the trenches 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 with games. I am more of trying to gauge teams and their successes for the entire season. And that means that my teams can lose these types of games, and that's okay. But if you're picking these games and you lose, you feel like it's a big black mark. How can they perform that way? But that's what, even though you're supposed to, as a handicapper, just let it go over your head. But it hurts you more as a picker every week than it is, in my mind, as somebody that's gauging for the future and realizing you're gonna lose games that you really have no idea why you lost them. And that's why if you're a Baltimore fan or a Steeler fan or a Bronco fan or even a Dolphin fan, a Panther fan, or a Raider fan, you just have to go, whatever. Okay? It's just one of those weeks. It means nothing. I mean, look at the Raiders. I mean, seriously. I mean, the Raiders completely didn't show up from the very first interception by David Carr. What was he doing on that pass, that opening pass, that the one that was intercepted? And by the way, I always say, I don't always, but I get confused always with David and Derek. I wish that the parents would have named the kids the different D. So Derek Carr, it was like a punt. You see that bomb he threw that got picked off? I'm like looking at it, and I'm, what is that? And sure enough, it was picked off. I mean, who throws bombs like as high in the air as you can? I mean, I don't know, Derek Carr is better than that. That was just a sign that this was not going to be a good night for Oakland, and they were never in it. I mean, Amari Cooper keeps dropping passes. You knew eventually Michael Crabtree would drop them, because this whole thing about who's the number one receiver. Well, you know what? If Michael Crabtree is the number one receiver on Oakland, it's not because Michael Crabtree is so special. It's because Amari Cooper has been awful this season. All right, because Michael Crabtree is not a number one receiver on anybody's team. And if he is, then your team isn't all that great, or at least your team is not a passing team. But the Raiders completely did not show up. And Washington, I mean, Chris Thompson, Jesus. I mean, on that first touchdown pass, who's covering Chris Thompson? All he did was have these two huge plays last week against the Rams. So do you think you should be covering Chris Thompson? 150 yards and another touchdown receiving for Chris Thompson. And Cousins had the game that he has. This is why I've said for the last year and a half that Kirk Cousins deserves the money. Now, is Kirk Cousins, Tom Brady, Drew Brees, those guys? No. Aaron Rodgers? No. Not even Russell Wilson. But he's the next thing. He's in the group with the Phillip Rivers and even the Eli Mannings, who's won 2 Super Bowls. Those guys. He's in that group. And there's nothing wrong with that group. Okay, that group, if you have talent around you, good coach, good defense, you can win a Super Bowl with Kirk Cousins. But that's another story. Jets Dolphins, we talked about that on Jets Confidential Radio, another situation where it was clear to me that when you see Miami and Tampa Bay both lay major eggs the week after they play their first game of the season, week 2, and all the emotion that goes into that game after waiting and then finally playing. And we talked about this on the show with Tony last Thursday. We had no idea. Actually, we talked about this 2 weeks ago. We had no idea how they were going to react in week 2 because it had never been done before. Well, they both won. Okay, so we really, in a way, didn't know how they were going to react into week 2 for them after winning week 1. Well, now we know. They both laid an egg. So that's why you can't even read anything into it with Tampa Miami based on that scenario. And look, for Tampa Bay, it's worse because of the injuries that are piling up. I mean, Levante David who's only one of their top defenders, is now out for a month at least. And Gerald McCoy, he's starting to get banged up more and more as the years go on. He plays, and they're going to need him to play because he's one of the best interior defensive linemen in the NFL. I mean, they had about a handful of guys that either were banged up or did not play. But still, I mean, Minnesota just destroyed them. I mean, I was starting to feel a little bit nervous when I took Minnesota 2 weeks ago in my futures after doing nothing. See, to me, and I said this before when the Vikings brought in Case Keenum. I said Case Keenum is your above average backup quarterback. That's the type of guy that has a lot of experience recently as a starter, which is what you want. He's not old. And he is, and you have the talent on the team. They got a really good defense. Now you got a nice little running back. He's what you want. That if you need a guy to go in for 3 or 4 games, that is as good as it's going to get as a backup quarterback. And then he laid an egg against the Steelers. And I was like, oh no. What if Bradford's out a month and this is how he plays? It's over. And then he comes back and plays like this. 369 and 3 touchdowns. So he's definitely somewhere in between first start, second start. But that type of performance, I think, says more about really what is just one of those games where you just go, what? I mean, Winston with 3 interceptions, he hasn't yet developed. There are some guys. So that's why I talked about I've talked about this before about Dak Prescott. We don't know, okay, because I really do believe that Dak Prescott is never going to progress as much as you would think he will based on his rookie season. That doesn't mean that I don't think Dak Prescott's going to have a long career as a starter and he's going to win games and may even win a Super Bowl. But when you have such a promising first season, a lot of times you would then think, oh, this guy is going to be awesome. He's like, this is a rookie? Just imagine what's going to happen when he gets some experience. I think that, look, an example I'm going to use, but it's like not a good example for Prescott, is Mark Sanchez. Mark Sanchez goes to back-to-back championship games, second year in his career, plays his best football in the postseason, and you would think, wow, just imagine top 10 pick in the draft, USC, back-to-back championship games. Boy, is this guy going to be special. He can't even. He'd be lucky if he's a number two in this league. But the point is that with Winston, I don't know. I mean, is he going to improve? Now, as you know, I am not a big Dirk Cutter fan. I think Dirk Cutter is a gimmicky offensive guy. I think that, sure, you'll see some points on the board at times. You'll see, statistically speaking, Tampa Bay will continue during the season. It'll be a long year. They'll put up numbers. But can they actually make the postseason and do something in the postseason? See, I think they can make the postseason. But can they get to the postseason and do something? And this is problematic to me. Because at some point, Jameis Winston, you would have thought, after coming out of nowhere, okay, as just out of high school, and look at the superstar at Florida State, and national championship, and almost back-to-back national championships, and all these awards, and he comes to the pros, and doesn't look halfway bad as a rookie. Okay, he's a rookie like everyone else. He has some issues, and then look at his progress, and you're starting to think. But then every so often, he has these games, and not like once every 5 or 6 games, but enough where you're like, is he getting better? I mean, because is he just going to be, I don't know, is his ceiling going to be the 8th best quarterback in the NFL, the 12th best quarterback in the NFL, the 10th best? Is that a ceiling? Because that's not what the Bucs thought they were getting. Let me tell you that. Because look, I mean, seriously, if the Bucs If the Bucks are in a situation where they have to pay Winston the way, say, Cousins wants to get paid, well, of course the Bucks are going to pay him, right? Oh, Jameis Winston, he's going to be a superstar. Nobody says that about Cousins, but they'll say it about Winston. I mean, I'm sorry. I tell you right now, today, I'd rather have, not just today, but today for the future, I'd rather have Kirk Cousins. I don't yet trust Jameis Winston. And part of the problem is that I don't trust their cutter. Short term, it might be a good thing for Jameis Winston. Put up some pinball machine stats. You'll have some good games, statistically speaking, and all that. But are you really developing? And is your team developing? Are you going to develop a winning culture there? I don't know. With Cutter, no. To me, the best you can ever hope for with their Cutter, the ceiling, is what's going on in Green Bay with McCarthy. That's the ceiling. Because I've said for 3 years now that Green Bay should have moved on from McCarthy. 3 years. If you can't get the Packers back to the Super Bowl with Aaron Rodgers as often as they've been to the postseason by now, that's his fault. You know, this constant indecision every season about whether or not I'm going to run the ball more or pass the ball more. And every time he decides to go one way or the other, it's always the wrong way. And the one time he won the Super Bowl, he came into the league just passing. And then And this had more to do with need, but almost have to. They had to run the ball in the postseason when they won the Super Bowl with James Starks. And that balanced them out for a championship. But then, after that, for a couple of years, it was back to pass. And what a surprise. They never got the balance back, and they never found that success again. Then they draft Eddie Lacy. And you know what I think about Eddie Lacy? I said it from his rookie season. Overrated. I've always believed Eddie Lacy was overrated. And you know what? If you've been listening to this network since he was a rookie, overrated. He isn't even overrated anymore because he's not even number 3. He's not even number 2 on the Seattle Seahawks depth chart. But what did Mike McCarthy do? Oh, Eddie Lacy. I'm going to run with Eddie Lacy. Now I'm going to balance it out now with Eddie Lacy. Because he actually thought Eddie Lacy was some sort of great player. And so I'm going to take the ball out of Aaron Rodgers' hands and keep running the ball with Eddie Lacy. Now, there's a difference between having balance and stupidity, where in critical times, you rely more or just as much on Lacy as you were with Aaron Rodgers. And that was dumb. And that got them nowhere. But now Lacy's gone, and it's like, oh, well, Lacy's gone. I got to go back to throwing the ball a million times. If you don't believe in Ty Montgomery, or you think Ty Montgomery shouldn't, the workload is too much, well, then get Jamal Williams in there. Now, I know they've got some offensive line injuries, so there's a long way to go for that. But the point is that Dirk Cutter, Mike McCarthy, they're kind of the same mold. Sure, McCarthy's better. He's won a Super Bowl. But then again, Dirk Cutter's never had Aaron Rodgers. But they're from the same cloth. They really are. So with Tampa Bay, though, they get Doug Martin back. That'll be big. Look, the whole thing about Jaquiz Rodgers and those guys aren't number 1 backs, okay? They're not even close. Doug Martin is a number 1 back, and as long as he's healthy and ready to go, he's going to give him some balance. Now, the offensive line is kind of up and down. Hasn't been as good as they would have liked with the draft picks that they've spent. But still, you would expect some more from Jameis Winston. Just chalk this up as a game with some injuries and on the road and the hurricane, and I'm willing to do that. I just think it's just one of those little warning signs that we need to look at Winston again and go, what are we doing here? Speaking of what are we doing here, Phillip Rivers, I mean, you could tell this is one of the first times in a long time that it looked like to me that Phillip Rivers just did not care. I'm not saying he didn't. It just looked like it. Phillip Rivers looked like he had a major hangover from last week. Remember on the show last week, I said, or one of the shows last week, I was talking about how I thought, it might have been the Thursday show, how I thought that how dumb it was for Anthony Lynn to trust a rookie kicker more. 19 seconds on the clock in that game against the Dolphins. The ball's at the 30. You have Phillip Rivers, as your quarterback, 30, right? I think it was at 30. Yeah, Philip, it might have been at the 20, 25. You have Rivers as your quarterback, okay? You can run a play. You can run a play anywhere and stop the clock, even if it's in bounds. The only thing that goes wrong if you run a play with 19 seconds left and no timeouts is if you get sacked or a penalty that moves you further back. That's it. But the week before that, they ran a play in a similar situation. Rivers looked at it, diagnosed it, was covered, threw it out of bounds. They settled for the field goal attempt against Denver. Here, Anthony Lynn decides, 19 seconds left. Oh, well, whatever the reason is I've got to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and trust my young rookie kicker more than Phillip Rivers. So you tell me. So I was critical of that. And now all of a sudden, 1 week later, Phillip Rivers is playing a game like he doesn't care. I mean, whether or not consciously or subconsciously, something is seeping into Phillip Rivers right now after losing another. When you lose, and we talked about this on Thursday's show, we went over all of the close losses that the Chargers have been through the last few years. That has to weigh on Phillip Rivers. It has to weigh on him that the offensive line stinks. It has to weigh on him that I have to do everything myself. That I got all these coaches that are screwing things up. I had McCoy screw up the first game of the season in Kansas City last year. And that basically was the beginning of the end for our entire season. I have another new coach that comes in here, and right off the bat, here we go. Second game, let me control the game, not a rookie kicker. You let the rookie kicker control the game, and look what happens. And then, where's Hunter Henry? Look, Antonio Gates is a Hall of Famer. Everybody knows it. Great player. But franchises, we've seen this over decades. Franchises that worry so much about players that were Hall of Famers at one time with the same franchise, and they just are in this constant, well, hey, we got to treat him properly. I talked about this, about the whole David Harris thing with the Jets. Oh, well, we've got to take care of this guy. And he's a Hall of Famer. We got to do this for him and that for him. Oh, and Phillip Rivers loves him, and they got this great connection. And we're gonna just keep letting Antonio Gates hang around here, because as long as Antonio Gates plays for the Chargers, even if they split reps, Gates and Henry, it's going to interfere in the progress of Henry, the growth of Henry, and the overall team production. Because Henry is better than Gates today. And the fact that in 2 of 3 games, Henry has gotten 0 production. 0. And in the one game he plays, the game in between, he was, 7 for 7 targets. You have Gates on that field as often as they do, Rivers is going to go to him. That's his boy. Been his boy for 10 years. He's going to keep going to him. And the responsibility is not necessarily just on Rivers, it's more so on management. Management should have realized this. What do you think? I was talking about this on the Jets show with Matt Forte. The Jets shouldn't worry about Matt, especially Matt Forte. He's been with the team for 1 year. They shouldn't worry about Matt Forte and what he thinks or veteran leader in the locker room and all that. You worried about the growth of Bilal Powell, who is so much faster and quicker and more productive than Forte right now. Why on earth would you play Forte more than Powell? The only reason Powell had more carries or reps than Forte in this game yesterday was because of Forte's injury. Everybody can see Powell's a better player right now. So so my suggestion was you trade Forte, you eat the $3 or $4 million. And you do it because it's the betterment of the growth of the players and even the production of the team now and in the future. Not because we want to save $3 or $4 million and we're trying to do what's best for a guy who's good in the locker room and is a stand-up guy and has had a nice career. You don't think about those things. Now, look, the Jets didn't when they let David Harris go, and I'm not saying that's what they're doing now. But my point with the Chargers is that's what they're doing here. It's clear. They're trying to appease Gates because he's a Hall of Famer, he's a class guy, and it's impeding the progress of that offense. Hunter Henry should not have 2 games in the first 3 games of the season with nothing. Nothing. You want to know why Phillip Rivers has no touchdowns and 3 interceptions? There you go. And I don't want to hear, well, that's because they need Henry to block. No. You want a tight end to block as an extra blocker? Then Gates sits on the sidelines. If you don't want him to block, you bring in your number 3 tight end to block, and Henry goes out for passes. So I don't even want to hear that nonsense. Tennessee, Seattle, and that there's two distinct calls this weekend that were just awful. How on earth does Seattle and Richard Sherman get away with the late hit on Mariota, and then that referee, those referees decide, unsportsmanlike for both teams. They actually, how can they be so dumb? You know what that is? Intimidation. It's intimidation because of what happened earlier in the game with Richard Sherman. They're intimidated. They're intimidated by the player. They're intimidated by the organization. Even though it was in Tennessee, they were intimidated. They did not want to call another 15-yard penalties exclusively on Sherman. So let's even it out. Even though Sherman was able to then, basically, he got a free hit. He got a free hit on Mariota. And then, of course, the biggest one, I don't want to hear anybody say anything to me about, because, of course, Tony Dungy is such a kiss ass on that show on Sundays. And the same show, by the way, that it took what? How long did it take for that show? What was it? 25 minutes, I believe, right? I think that's what it was. It was a 25-minute, 25 minutes before they started talking football on Football Night in America. 25 minutes. If I want to watch the news and politics, I got 100 different talking heads on a few dozen networks that I can choose from during the week. Hey, let's see here. The bright minds, the producers, the directors, the bright minds of these networks in conjunction with the NFL. Let's see. We're losing ratings. Let me think here. We're losing ratings. What do we do? I got it. Let's talk politics. That's what we do. And let's just continue to talk about it. And then on a highlight show, when everybody wants to find out what's going on, maybe they're busy, they come home, or they watch the 1:00 games, and then their wife takes over, and they got to do something, and they got to go outside and take care of the yard, and they come back in, and they put on the Football Night in America. They want to catch up on all the scores. 25 minutes of politics on that show before they talk about games. What an embarrassment. I am sick to death of the media. This is not a Democratic thing. It's not a Republican thing. It's a political thing, and it's the media, and the media sucks. And I'm sick of them. Now, if you've listened to me for years, you know more than anything that I can't stand a great deal of the media. I can't stand their ignorance, and now I can't stand their politics. I can't stand the fact that they get in the way of, like, I didn't mind. That's why I was just saying, I didn't mind if you want to talk politics and you want to have an opinion one way or another. There's Monday through Friday, even on Sunday mornings, you got a half a dozen shows, 24 shows. You got your pickings. Enjoy it. That's your life. I got no problem with it. Whatever. Now, I wouldn't recommend it. I think with politics today, that's no way to live a life, to watch those shows all the time, unless you have to. I mean, I have to watch some of those shows because of the fact that that's part of my business. But if I didn't have to, I wouldn't do it. Why would I? I'd rather have entertainment in my life. I'd rather turn on a TV show if I'm going to watch television. Something to entertain me, make me laugh, make me cry. Politics? What am I, nuts? But if that's what floats your boat, then by all means, Monday through Friday, Sunday mornings. I don't want to watch it or hear. I don't care what the players are doing. That's not the point. They can do what they want to. whether I agree or disagree with it. I don't care. But you don't have to talk about it. If you want to reference it, fine. If you want to show a little clip of it, fine. 25 minutes of a show that's supposed to be a highlight show for football? Are you freaking insane? But that's what you get with elitists. The people who think they're better than you. That's what they are. That's exactly what they are. They think they're better than you. And they are going to prove it by making a point about something that they believe in or they think is important, even though it's a sports show. Has nothing to do with the games. Zero. Nothing. I don't want to hear anything about, oh, well, this team played well. It must have been because they came together as a group. No. You know why? A lot of teams did it. Did every team do it win? No. So I don't want to hear this team bandied together and had this little holding hands with the owner or the GM or the coach and, hey, they won. That must have worked. Oh, yeah? What about the teams that did the same thing and lost? Okay? Nonsense. So talk sports on a sports show, especially in a game. Especially in a game where your ratings are plummeting. Your ratings are plummeting. Show the games. Nobody wants to hear your values in politics. Especially now in today's day and age. More than ever. We're sick of it. So we want the release. We want the distraction. And then you go there and remind us of the stuff that we have to deal with when we go back to work on Monday through Friday. And you wonder why your ratings stink. So anyway, I brought this up because Tony Dungy, who has kissed his ass to the network and to the NFL, more ways than one. And this is from somebody who I respect very much. I think Tony Dungy, without question, is a class act and a class human being. That doesn't make him a great analyst. And look, if you can't when they have Harrison on there, it's like Harrison is like anti-Dungy. Dungy is going to kiss everybody's ass. Harrison is going to do the opposite. He is going to throw everybody under the bus. So it's like they figure that you get one guy that trashes everybody, another guy that trashes no one. Let's put them together and it'll equal things out. But that doesn't work. Sorry. And they may think it does, but it doesn't. So here's Tony Dungy saying, "Oh yeah, that was the right call. That was it. That was his explanation of the Atlanta-Detroit game when Detroit got absolutely screwed." Funny thing is it was good for me and bad for me. It was good for me because I had Atlanta -3. It was bad for me because I had Matthew Stafford in my fantasy league, and if I wind up losing this week by a few points, it's going to be because of that touchdown. It's taken away. So it was good for me and bad for me. But the ultimate outcome was so wrong. It was pathetic. It was terrible. Terrible. You're going to change things and override with replay. I've said this for years. Man, you better get it 100% right. And he didn't. There's some people that believe he was in. Some people believe he wasn't. Then you're trying to tell me, wait a second, let me get this straight. Okay? Let me get this straight. You call a touchdown on the field. You called a touchdown. You are now penalizing Detroit for calling a touchdown. You are basically not giving them a chance to get another playoff because you made the mistake to call the touchdown. It wasn't like Detroit called a touchdown and now you go, oh, no, Detroit, you can't. That touchdown that you called, that stopped the clock. You're now got a 10-second runoff. Game over. At least I could understand that if there was such a thing, but there isn't. So who gets screwed? Detroit. So the official made the wrong call, even though, to me, there was nothing wrong with it. It was one of those calls, in my mind, whatever the call was on the field, would have stand. If he would have called that he was down, I wouldn't complain. Same thing, touchdown. So the official gets it wrong, and Detroit suffers. And then I got Tony Dungy saying, oh, yeah, that was the right call. And I don't want to hear letter of the law either. If you want to say it was the right call because it was the letter of the law, then I want to hear a complaint about the rule because they got screwed. And what a great performance by our boy Deshaun Watson. I've been saying it. Haven't I been saying it? Deshaun Watson. That's from a movie, by the way, not the Deshaun Watson part. Deshaun Watson, 301 yards, right? 301. A couple touchdowns. Yes, he threw a couple picks, but he's a rookie. But at least he threw 301, 2 touchdowns, 41 yards rushing. And if it wasn't for a Tom Brady miraculous last-second drive down the field, Watson wins the game as a 14-point dog in New England. And that is why I said all along that player, sure, he may not have this and he may not have that. And yes, there's a thing to say to that. I mean, on average, when you scout players like Deshaun Watson, sure. I mean, he's not this, he's not that. But there's the same thing with Tom Brady. There are a small percentage of players that defy the size, the strength, the speed, for quarterbacks, the accuracy. There's that small percentage that can defy that. And that's what I've been trying to say for the past year. Deshaun Watson is one of those guys. And that's why I said at the very open, Dabo Swinney was 100% right. And that's why I said leading up to the draft as a Jet fan all the way through that, yeah, I understood drafting Deshaun Watson at 6 was probably high and all that. But I said, well, you know what? If there is a guy if they're going to draft a quarterback, and I said, look, I don't want anything to do with Mr. Trubisky. I said that repeatedly. If you're going to take a quarterback, do not take this guy. But if you're going to take a quarterback, and I'm not saying Trubisky's going to be a bad player, but if you're going to take a quarterback at 6, you had better take Deshaun Watson. Now, they got a player I loved. Not complaining about that. But Deshaun Watson is going to be a fantastic player. But the one thing that Dan Schonka did say last week or a couple weeks ago, which is true, is he must stay healthy. Now, I said this about Marcus Mariota a couple of years ago when potentially the Jets were thinking about Mariota, trade up and get him. And I said, do not trade the farm to get Mariota. He will not stay healthy. He's not big enough. He needs to run around sometimes. I don't see it. It's not worth it. And what does he do? He gets hurt last year, ruins their season, chance to go to the postseason, and I don't think we've seen the last of Mariota getting hurt. Now, maybe Watson will be that same type of person. I don't know. But if he can stay healthy for most of his career, he's going to be fantastic. And look out for the Texans. Now, I took the Texans on my futures, which I feel real good about right now. I think when they were 50-1. Now, I don't know what they are right now. We'll take a look at that and update it in the coming days. But when I took them, it was last week, September 17th, and they were 50-1. So the good thing about the losses is that their odds will still stay pretty decent. So I don't know what it'll be now, but I've already got 50-1 on the Texans. And I feel really good about that. Clowney was a monster. And what a difference Houston looks against New England as opposed to last year when you got Clowney and J.J. Watt on the field at the same time. Clowney with 6 tackles, 2 sacks, the touchdown. They came that close, Houston, to pulling it off. But when you're facing the best team in the world, it ain't so easy, especially in New England. And that was with Brady throwing 5 touchdown passes. All right, and let's see. I think that's about it for now as far as the NFL. Back to college, big game coming up, and we'll talk more about later in the week on our college football show on Friday. Really, there's only a couple of good games and one big one, and that's Clemson, Virginia Tech. We've been talking about the last couple of weeks. Speaking of Deshaun Watson's former team, now can Clemson? I was talking before about Penn State and USC, especially Penn State. Can Clemson lose a game and get to the postseason and get to the playoffs? Yeah, I think they can because they're defending national champs. This is not an easy game. The only thing is that I'm concerned about is that Louisville has already proven that, they're just like last year. They're not going to be able to win the big games. And Florida State, well, what are you going to say about Florida State? The quarterback situation, the true freshman is just not ready. And so that was one of our money line plays that came through for us on Saturday. North Carolina State winning that game outright. And so that might hurt Clemson. because the other division, might actually be tougher this time around, believe it or not, because Duke's playing good football, and of course Miami could be dangerous, and then here you got Virginia Tech. So this is going to be a I mean, if you look at Clemson's schedule now, this is it. So this is good. This is what could separate them from. I mean, if you haven't already taken them, and we're in that debate right now about what we should do. It all depends. I think their line is somewhere around 8-1. We're going to have to think about that because the line is going to drop considerably if they win this game. They may end up right neck and neck with Alabama as co-favorites if they win this game, because when you take a look at the schedule, this is it. I mean, later in the year, things get a little bit tough because 2 out of the remaining 4 games are at NC State and South Carolina, but they're still games, a team should win. And one home game is the tough game is Florida State, which, okay, true freshman will be a little bit more prepared, but still it'll be a freshman. So that is still a really good situation for Clemson. This is by far their last remaining toughest game of the season for Clemson. If they win this game, so just like I said with Penn State, on one end, if you win it and then lose another game later on in the year, at least it's only one loss. You win the ACC championship game, maybe you get in. The other hand, they may look at it and say, well, yeah, but you lost to NC State, or that's not a good loss. Whereas if you lose to Virginia Tech, they'll excuse it. You run the table, win the ACC championship game, and maybe get in, sort of like what happened last year. Even though Clemson was able to get to the playoffs last year by losing to Pittsburgh at home. So there was that. So you would think that as long as Clemson can just run through the table, maybe they lose once, even if it's on Saturday, they'll be okay. But anyway, that's the game of the week, no question about it, and that's the one that we're all looking forward to. And based on how the last 2 Saturday night games have gone, wow, that could be a really, really good one. Clemson and Virginia Tech, because that's the big Saturday night game coming up this week. Also, last week, they wanted to run my boy Kevin Sumlin out of town, but they haven't been able to do that yet. Texas A&M beat Arkansas in overtime. Again, they seem to have Arkansas's number right now. Vandy, boy, I was very, very surprised that Vandy got absolutely annihilated by Alabama. Very, very surprised. Alabama decided to play their best game of the year against Vandy, and Vandy's going, did you have to play like this against us? We know that you're more talented than us, but really, seriously? So it was not pretty. South Carolina got a very, very fortunate win against Louisiana Tech. But hey, you know what? They made plays at the end. They scored 17 points in the fourth quarter. They looked like they were dead when Louisiana Tech won led with the field goal late. But give them credit, and that was a huge win because you did not want to lose back to Kentucky and Louisiana Tech after the way that the season had started for the Gamecocks. Georgia over Mississippi State, yeah, okay, that's not a surprise. Mississippi State, as we said, that's a tough schedule. LSU, Georgia, Auburn. Winning 2 out of 3 would almost be like Alabama-ish. But 31-3, that was a little bit of a surprise. But I will say that Georgia now is legitimately stock way up. I might actually put them into my futures this week. That's how serious I am about Georgia. The more reps that Fromm gets, the better, even if and when Eason comes back. So this is a good defense Georgia has. They have Chubb in the backfield. You take a look at their schedule, and that's also good news. They have one tough game, and that's not Florida. I mean, if they're good and they want to be in the SEC championship game and play for the playoffs, well, they got to beat Florida because Florida isn't worth it. But Auburn is. And that all depends on Stidham, of course. You know how I feel about Stidham. But this Georgia team, watch out. They are a serious national championship contender now. And I've definitely got my eye on them, and I believe I will be adding them to my futures this week. And as we were talking about the Big Ten, and I said I would mention that I am adding Wisconsin to my futures as well. I love the schedule. Okay, maybe they lose either Iowa or Michigan, but they can go undefeated. Their schedule, the way it's worked out this year, is perfect. I mean, they have Ohio State and Penn State off the schedule from last year. I mean, wow, huh? So, and the 2 big games, Michigan and Iowa, are home. Everybody thought Northwestern was going to be playing better. They haven't. And that game's at home. And then do you really care about Nebraska? Come on. Matter of fact, the one game that may be an issue on the road is at Minnesota. I mean, I'm high on Minnesota. I've picked them the last few games. They've been PJ Fluck's doing a tremendous job. It shows you what a great coach he is. Maybe that's something to keep an eye on. If they're undefeated and the next game is the Big Ten championship game and there's a little bit more of a stress factor, I can see that being a very tough game. But, I mean, Alex Hornibrook played the best game of his career against BYU, and it wasn't because it was BYU. He was just on target. He was extremely accurate. And, boy, if he's anything like that in big games, they're going to be dangerous because they've got the freshman, Jonathan Taylor, running like a typical big-time Wisconsin running back. I am a little bit unsure, of course, about the defense. They lost so many big players. Especially at that linebacker, very important linebacker position for that program, and Watt and Beagle, and there's just tough players to lose. But anyway, the schedule offsets it. It makes it easier for them and for me to believe that if they can get through undefeated, they get to the Big Ten championship game. That means you win one big game in that spot. Okay, the Michigan game is big, but it's at home. But you win that one big game away from home in the Big Ten championship game, and then you're in the playoffs. And that's right now. I think they were 33-1 a couple days ago. I don't see any reason why that number would change much. They didn't play last week, so if that's still the same, no matter what it is, I'm taking them. But we'll talk more about that in the coming days. I'll post it, and then we'll talk about it on Friday. Don't forget, we'll post a lot of these reports at ourlads.com. My reports. I've got the NFL report every week, the college football report every week. And then, of course, also our fantasy reports that Jamal posts up on the site as well. Florida, what a crushing loss for Kentucky. They were trying to break the big losing streak. Kentucky covered, so there's that. But still, you're leading the game by 13 points. Second half, you're finally going to break the longest losing streak in FBS, and they couldn't do it. And they get a terrible, and I'm not saying it was a bad call, they just got a terrible holding call on a play that was a 20-yard run. Matter of fact, they didn't even run that play. See, when they were lining up for that last play, the run play, the holding call, and this is, by the way, what I was saying about the only thing that could happen, like in the San Diego, the Charger game last week, is that what I was actually saying in this circumstance, because they didn't have Phillip Rivers, was, you know what, just kick the field goal. Because in college especially, I don't trust the coaches. I don't trust the players. They're just kids, that the clock will run out. They'll do something stupid. And they had just gotten themselves in field goal range. And I said, go ahead, kick the field goal. Now, they ran the play. Guy got a big, 20-yard run. And I went, oh, okay, I guess that works too. And then I got the holding penalty. And I was like, oh, no. So anyway, and then the guy had to kick like a huge 57-yard field goal. That was short. So anyway, Florida is still not a very good team. They're very lucky that they've been beating a couple of mediocre teams in Tennessee and Kentucky, but this is not your typical Florida team. Now maybe by the time they get their suspended players back, they might be, but the quarterback situation right now is still pretty weak. Anyway, so that's what happened in the Southeast Conference. Pac-12, look, I've said this for the last year or so, and I think I'm just going to keep beating this now officially, but Jim Mora needs to go. Jim Mora Jr. needs to go. I mean, it's an embarrassment. It really is. I mean, the guy, I remember the last couple of years when people were talking about college coaches, head coaches, NFL, and some people were throwing in Jim Mora Jr.'s name. I was laughing my butt off. Are you kidding me? See, I figured that Jim Mora Jr. had found a good situation here because he could recruit well. He had already started to recruit well. He started to turn UCLA around. They got Josh Rosen and all that. And I figured, okay, maybe this will work here in college because he's never going to be a head coach in the pros again. And then it's falling apart. It's falling apart. Josh Rosen's definitely going to leave now the way this team's playing at the end of this year. Why would you stay? And it's just if you can't win respectively with Josh Rosen and you need him to keep throwing the ball like for 500 yards every week and your defense is pathetic. I mean, you can't recruit some defenders, and I know they've had a few over the last few years. I know you lost them to the pros. I get that, but that's why you're supposed to keep recruiting guys. But UCLA's defense is terrible, and they can't even stop Stanford when their starting quarterback goes down in another situation. Where one of the reasons why I gave UCLA a chance in this one was because Chris was playing awful. But Chris goes out with an injury. Costello comes in, and they look 10 times better. And what about Oregon? Huge win for Todd Graham. Huge win for Todd Graham. I mean, they were really starting. I mean, there was some pressure there going on coming into the season about Graham and what's going on here. 5-win season, 6-win season before that. What happened to Todd Graham as a superstar coach? And they missed a quarterback. And I mentioned this last week that I was staying away from this game because of the fact that Manny Wilkins actually started to look a little bit better. He is improving. He's now a legitimate, decent quarterback. He's at that spot now where something like this can happen, and it did. And they pulled off the upset and beat Oregon. Now, Washington, Colorado, that was all about the quarterback situation. Montez was terrible. There was a situation in that game that changed everything. Colorado's leading the game. I think it was 7-3, maybe. I think so. So they're leading the game. Might have been 7-0. They're leading the game, controlling the game early, second quarter, and it's 3rd and 3. And Montez runs out of the pocket, and he's about to pick up a first down, and he slides. And it wasn't because the guy was about to nail him. He just figured, I'm going to slide because I don't want to get hit. And I think I picked up the first down. Well, you didn't. Because you slid, you did not pick up the first down. That was weak. I mean, nobody wants to see that in college. You're supposed to just be throwing your body around in college. You're supposed to be having fun, determined, pick up the first down. I'm going to beat this team. You don't be sliding when even if the guy hits you, it would have just been a regular hit. You can't take a hit. And what happens? They block the punt. What happens? Washington scores. What happens on the very next series for Colorado? He throws an interception. What happens? Washington scores. 10-7 Washington halftime. They blow them out in the second half. So Montez making terrible plays. That's why statistics are meaningless. You got to look at the plays. He was awful, and that was the big difference in the game. USC had to score 17 points in the fourth quarter to get away from Cal, and they needed a defensive big play that set up the touchdown that really changed everything in that game. That was a close game, and we're not really surprised. I mean, that's fine. I mean, it doesn't diminish anything about USC. We thought that they would have a little bit of a hangover after what happened the previous week, and that's exactly what happened. I think Baylor has got to be feeling pretty good about themselves. They put 41 points on the board against Oklahoma. They actually had a shot to tie that game late. So, hey, you know what? If Matt Rule has found himself a quarterback, then fine. Then look out for Baylor. Unfortunately, they gave up 49 points. So they were playing great defense, but not scoring. Well, now they gave up 49 points, and they start scoring. So, but I think Matt Rule is going to be fine there. Eventually, he'll get his players in there. If anything, that's not a good sign for Oklahoma. Speaking of Oklahoma teams, Oklahoma State laid an egg. As I mentioned on the show on Saturday, we had replaced Oklahoma State from our Final Four pick and replaced them with Clemson. So we did that at the right time. And not necessarily because we thought they were going to lose to TCU, but the point was we thought overall that because Clemson was playing better and that we really felt Clemson would make the Final Four, that somebody had to move out of there. And Oklahoma State, the problem is they're playing each other. And then they got the Big 12 championship game this year. So that means if the winner of that game, one of those games, loses another game like Oklahoma State just did, then the chances of either of these teams getting the playoffs are remote. Because even though they have a Big 12 championship game, if you have a like Oklahoma, okay, they got the win at Ohio State. So if let's say they lose at Stillwater, but then win the Big 12 championship game, they will have a legitimate shot at the playoffs, okay? But Oklahoma State's not in that situation. See, now Oklahoma State cannot lose the rest of the season, and I don't even know if they'll get to the playoffs even. The Big 12 is not the ACC. They are just not respected enough, and we saw that a few years ago with TCU Baylor thing. They're just not respected enough right now. If you have a loss, you're in trouble. You may not make the playoffs, and that was the reason I decided with Clemson playing better than I thought they were. I think I should probably make the switch, and I'm glad I did. Also in action, ACC, Duke continues to play really good football, and Miami. You know what? Miami could be a good team. You know, I've mentioned before, I'm a Mark Richt fan. I thought, look, he did a great job at Georgia, but he's at his alma mater, so he's in a really good situation. They got Duke on Friday, So keep that in mind. So you got two teams right now, could be the two teams. Well, one of those teams will probably battle Virginia Tech for that division title. Miami gets Virginia Tech at home. And I'm not sure Duke has got what it takes to win the division, but I will say that when they won this division a few years ago, which is 2013, they lost that Florida State ACC championship game. I think they may have just as good as a team as that team. I will say that. They get Florida State at home on October 14th with a freshman quarterback. That's winnable, but they got to go to Virginia Tech on a couple of weeks after that. So if they're going, because I don't think they'll win that game. And so here's the thing: if because Miami's at home on Friday, if Duke really wants to go back to the ACC championship game, you're gonna have to win on Friday. I don't think they'll be able to get there any other than that. So I'm not saying they can't do it. Should be a very good game, but Rozier got an opportunity to play. More experience for him is good. He hadn't played in a few weeks. He's developing nicely. That this is a dangerous team, Miami, but this Duke Miami game should be a really good one on Friday, and a very important one for the division as well. Let's see. Central Florida beats Maryland because Maryland lost another quarterback. I can't believe it, but they did. So this was a very good under radar game for us. Both of these teams are teams to keep an eye on this season. After Maryland's win over Texas, and we've told you all season about Central Florida, but Maryland loses their quarterback, their second string, and now it's all dependent upon the health there, because if they got to go to a third string quarterback, as you can see, they're done. I can't even tell you what it would feel like to be a Maryland fan over the last few years with all the quarterbacks they've lost. It's got to be an absolutely miserable feeling. In the Conference USA, that was the AAC with Central Florida, who I still believe is going to wind up winning the entire AAC when it's all said and done. In the Conference USA, there wasn't really anything notable to speak about this week, except again, Louisiana Tech almost getting that big win against South Carolina. Notre Dame, a huge win over Michigan State. They ran the ball all over Michigan State. And Michigan State, we weren't sure how good they were. They had looked a little bit better, but they weren't playing anybody, and it showed. This is not going to be a good year for Michigan State. As soon as they started playing a team worth anything, and Notre Dame's not a great team, it made Notre Dame look great, and they're not. So a pretty bad loss for Michigan State, and any chances they had of being a difference maker. Huge wins for Miami of Ohio in the MAC and Ohio in the MAC. Ohio winning in overtime against Eastern Michigan. We had Eastern Michigan in that one, but Ohio got the job done, and a tough loss for Eastern Michigan. But look, Ohio at this point in time looks like maybe it'll go down to Miami, Ohio, and Ohio to represent that division and play in the MAC championship game, probably against Toledo. In the Sun Belt, New Mexico State continues to play good. They routed their opponent. Appalachian State lost a close one to Wake Forest out of the conference. Idaho, after not looking good the first few weeks of the season, is starting to look a little bit better. Won their game on the road in overtime. And Louisiana Monroe. I will say this. This is a team that I've got my eye on as a sleeper in that conference. I really like what Matt Viator can do. He's one of these coaches. I've said this before a few years, over the last few years. I like it when these programs go down to lower levels and get these really good coaches that may not be on the FBS level, but they have a lot of success elsewhere, and Matt Viator is one of them. He's a former head coach at McNeese State, and he won a ton of games at that level. He, matter of fact, never having a losing season. So that's a guy that knows how to coach, and I think he's going to turn that Louisiana Monroe program around. They had a tough loss, an 8-point loss at Memphis, a close loss to Southern Miss, two teams that they were, combined 35-point dogs to, and then they win this game in overtime at Louisiana, 56-50. So I can definitely see Louisiana Monroe go on a nice little winning streak now. So that's a team I'm going to be keeping an eye on in the Sun Belt. And finally, in the Mountain West, if you take a look there, we talked the other day about Virginia's big win. By the way, I should reference Virginia because that was a huge win again for Bronco Mendenhall. This team is for real. They're not going to win the ACC, but they're on their way. He's a great coach. They got a great staff there. And Bankert looks like he potentially, if he could play like this the rest of the season, they're going to be very dangerous. And as I also said the other day, it's time for Brian Harsin to leave. Now they're not going to let him go. He's got all his wins, and there's a little bit of tradition there, but the recruiting has suffered the last few years. They don't have anywhere near the talent that they used to have since Peterson's left, and it's showing. They got to make a move fast to reestablish their dominance. But look, it's been there. They haven't been to the Mountain West Championship game in 2 years. I don't care how many games they've won. They haven't even been able to get to the Mountain West Championship game. This is a team that used to play in these huge games under Peterson, and they can't even make it to the Mountain West Conference Championship game. So they got problems. They've had problems all season. They barely beat Troy. They barely beat New Mexico. There were signs there, and they got blown out like they should have against Virginia to actually let everybody know we got problems here. And they do. They have big problems. And San Diego State beat Air Force like they seem to always do in that one. And by the way, Wyoming had to go to overtime to beat a Hawaii team that is starting to get a little bit better. They haven't been as good since June Jones, but they're getting there. But Wyoming, Josh Allen, and the Cowboys came up with a much-needed victory. Okay, so that will wrap things up here on the Ourlads Football Network for OFN Monday nights. We want to thank Dan Weinreich for joining us talking fantasy football. Don't forget, we'll be back again on Wednesday with Dan Shanka. We'll have a lot to talk about in pro and college football. Thursday, Tony Mejia to preview the week in the NFL, Week 4. And then I'll be back on Friday to preview the week in college football. And then we'll also have our fantasy football show on Friday. So 4 more shows to go. 5 shows every week. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, and 2 Friday on the Ourlads Football Radio Network. So thanks for tuning in. We'll see you again on Wednesday. And don't forget, tomorrow on the Prime Sports Radio Network, we've got tennis coverage and Washington Nationals baseball coverage tomorrow evening. So enjoy the game tonight, everybody. We'll see you next time.